All right, good morning, everyone. Hope you all had a fun night staying in your room quietly watching the State of the Union. You accepted your assignment? Okay. Well, I want to start this amazing session with a quick disclaimer. This is a trigger warning. This is going to be a very serious discussion about health, mortality, political divide, and we are going to make fun of all of those topics in a way that may bring out a bit of the gallows humor. So let's start off with the senator announcing this brand new podcast that he has. What's it called?
We went with Not Dead Yet. We played with Dead Man Talking for a while, and another finalist was I'd Rather Die Than Do a Podcast with You. The background story on this is my co-host, Chris Steyerwalt, and I had been kicking around doing a podcast for about 7 years. Forgive me for sometimes speaking a little haltingly. I'm usually super high on morphine, and so that I could be present today with you all, I'm only a little bit on drugs today, so I'm feeling a lot of pain.
Can we get the morphine drip at the IV place here in the hotel?
I saw the hangover recovery thing. I saw some of your President's Council folks in there getting hydrated. Anyway, so I'm on a minor amount of morphine today, so forgive me, Shannon, for sliding around to try to take some tumor pressure off my spine. But this buddy of mine and I had been talking about doing a podcast for 7 years, and many times we let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We were almost across the finish line and didn't do it. We agreed to do it in October, and then I got a death sentence diagnosis in December. And so it seemed kind of funny to say, I'd rather die than do a podcast with you. And we decided to still do the podcast to try to redeem the time. So we call it Not Dead Yet. It came out last week. The first episode with a guest was yesterday, Al Michaels, about the Olympics 1980 and current. And next week is Conan O'Brien. So listen, like, subscribe. Not Dead Yet, Sasse and Steyerwalt.
Awesome. So when you ask someone to go on the podcast and they say no, you can put a lot of pressure on them.
I'm a Nebraska farm kid by background, and we don't believe in victim talk, but I'm definitely playing the cancer card to get the guests we want.
Well, speaking of your Nebraska background, so representing in the United States Senate, President's Circle champion, that's where we first met and helped to raise money. What's your real estate background or history in Nebraska?
So I'm born in '72, and my dad was a lifelong football coach, but my parents are the Kramer versus Kramer generation, so they were kind of married and having me and then realizing they had to become adults. So my parents divorced when I was 1. They both remarried by the time I was 4. And so even though divorce is terrible, I had the blessing of 2 families that really kind of lived a couple miles apart and got along really well. So I grew up with 2 families. So my stepdad, since I was 3 years old, is a guy named Larry Shepard, and he ran a real estate firm in my little farm town of Fremont, Nebraska. So I grew up going to open houses on Sunday afternoon after church, and I've put signs up legally, and I know where they all are when you want to steal them and put them in the football coach's front yard after a bad Friday night loss.
That is some perfect preparation for politics as well. And,
stealthy.
And what led you you've had many careers, we've discussed in the intro. You're an academic, a professor, a senator. What led you to go into public service?
I was a small college president in Nebraska from 2009-10. I got elected in 2014, and we turned around this little college, and I had a great team, but I'm not Midas, but I got all the credit for the fact that we were one of the fastest growing colleges in America in that 4 or 5 year period. And so the alumni of this school kind of drafted me into an open Senate race in 2013-14. And unlike the omnicompetent, multi-talented Rob Portman, who was up here just before me, who has all these political skills, I don't have that. I just have a lack of a filter. So I just kind of say what I think. And so when I was getting recruited to run for Senate in 2013-14, I thought, I believe in America, I believe in the public square. I think there's a lot that's not working in our politics, but I'm definitely not electable. But since people were recruiting me to run anyway, and our kids were 12, 10, and 2, my 12-year-old is now 25. She's a pilot in the Air Force. What a dummy. I didn't give her permission to grow up. But she's here with me. So when Dad's on too much drugs, my wife believes I need adult supervision. So my 25-year-old in the Air Force is here with me. She was 12. 12, 10, and 2-year-olds, we decided, wouldn't it be fun to live on a bus for a year? And so we thought, let's try to run for office, not trying to win, but just to say whatever we believe about the future of America. That'll definitely make you unelectable if you say we need to raise the retirement age or things like that. And ended up, we won every county in Nebraska. So we found ourselves in the Senate.
So the lack of filter actually brings in more votes and brings in more opinions. How did that work for you in the Senate?
I wasn't that popular. Lots of the Senate doesn't work very well, and we kind of pretend that it does. And I think we should probably tell a little more truth about how irregular budgets are, for instance. We should have a budget process. That would be constitutional and useful.
What about shutdowns? We go through many calls for actions with this group, saying, please don't let the flood insurance program and housing programs lapse over a fight that's completely unrelated. How do we fix that in the longer term?
Yeah, so really well said. So first, apologies. I'm a Nebraskan. I'm not a denizen of Washington, D.C., so I don't really owe you this apology. But on behalf of everybody who's worked in Washington, apologies for how many times you have to do urgent, stupid work from September 23rd to 28th to October 2nd to October 5th. Let's just be honest about how dumb this process is, right? We have a Budget Control Act that was passed in 1974. It worked from 1974 to 1978. Since 1978, I'm 54 years old, I was born in 72, I'm just trying to do fast math here. In the 48 years since 1978, we've only had a budget process that spent more than a third of the public's dollars, I think 4 times in 48 years. So the fiscal year of the US government is October 1 to September 30th. Every year we get close to September 30th. The Congress hasn't passed appropriations bills. And so everybody screams, oh, the government's going to shut down. We're given this binary choice between let's fund the government at 0% of last year, shut down, or let's fund it at 102% of last year, means pretend every category we spent money on was fine, and let's just spend a little bit more. Just think about how asinine that is. Like, there's no household, there's no YMCA or Rotary Club, there's no real estate agency, there's no small business, there's no big business, there's nobody in America that would ever say, last year's budget, we're going to do it again at 0% or 102%. You say, well, what parts were useful? Where did we get ROI? What do we spend our money on? And so every year we do this false fire alarm, then we do a continuing resolution where we do basically 102% of last year. There's no small ball fix to this. Like, there isn't an easy technique. We're not going to revise the Budget Control Act of 1974 and it's going to fix the problem. We need a lot more people in Congress who want to do less grandstanding on social media and more serious work that includes trying to speak to 75 and 80 and 90% of the public in the middle about what a rational process would look like.
Well, why can't we revise the Budget Control Act? And what do you think about filibuster reform or any other efforts to make sure that these votes actually can matter and be pushing policies ahead?
Yeah, so just since you mentioned filibuster, let me say one big constitutional philosophical point. The founders were geniuses in devising a constitutional system that is skeptical of government and yet mindful of the fact that we need government. So just Civics 101, this is like 8th grade stuff, but that we don't do in Washington very well. You don't need government if people weren't sinners and selfish. We're broken, we're selfish, people want to take your life, your liberty and stuff, therefore you need your government. But because governors are also broken, you therefore need checks and balances. And so what the founders did, the Constitution is the greatest political document ever written. Political documents aren't the most important documents, but the Constitution is the greatest political document because it says government is not the author or source of your rights. You have your rights from God via nature pre-governmentally. Government is a shared project to secure those rights, but the main thing we have to do is make sure the government doesn't have too much power to run over all of your freedoms and all the spaces where liberty is lived. And so the First Amendment has religion, speech, press, assembly, protest. It's like a giant dog's breakfast just in the First Amendment. The whole purpose of the Constitution is to say, we want to make sure the government doesn't have too much power. So we divide power legislatively, executively, judicially. The private sector is more important than the public sector. The public sector that's local is more important than the public sector that's far away. Of the public sector that's far away, we should distinguish between these legislative, executive, and judicial functions. And in the legislature, we distinguish between the House and Senate, a more populist body that's supposed to go fast, and a Senate that's supposed to be the saucer that cools the boiling water of the passions of the House. And so I'm a big defender of the filibuster. But what the filibuster is supposed to do is bring people to the middle. I say this as a policy conservative. If you rank order my votes, I was like the 9th most conservative person in the Senate in the 8.5 years that I was there. So I'm a policy conservative. But everybody who sits in the Senate should be a dispositional and tonal moderate, meaning if you have a bell curve distribution of Americans' views, the angriest or loudest people at the right end or the left end, and I'm pretty far right, but right end or left end shouldn't get the majority of the representation. The majority of the representation should be for the big middle, the 60 plus or the 80 plus or the 90%. That's what the filibuster is supposed to do. So you should have a lot of people in the Senate who want to take risks to do big deals, big gang of kind of things, the Rob Portmans of the world. But we should be able to do immigration reform that says things like, we definitely need to control the border. There are jihadis, there are CCP or Iranian agents who want to get in across the southern border. We have to do border control. And also, we should have an immigration policy that recruits the most talent we can to the United States and recognizes that kids who were brought here through no choice of their own 15 or 20 or 25 years ago aren't going to be deported. And so it shouldn't be hard to do a big immigration grand bargain, and yet it is, because most people, I'll stop, I'm going to get on the nerves of my good friend Shannon by accidentally giving you a sermon. The reason the Senate doesn't work is because right now, the way we hear voice in our politics is through social media, and a tiny share of really loud, really angry people control most of what happens in the primaries. And most people in Congress, and I say this with greater criticism of the Senate because it should be a more important institution, most people in the Senate are so scared of losing their job that they won't say to 2% of the people, whether they agree with them or disagree with them, you're not going to get your way on everything just because you scream the loudest. We're here to represent good governance, and right now we don't have many people who do that.
You said that DC is run by weirdos who never want to leave. You got out. How great is the job that everybody wants to stay and be there for decades? And should we look at things, if it's not the policy reform or if it's not process reform, is it electoral reform?
Yeah, I think there are many reforms that we should consider. I'm in favor of term limits. But I think the bigger issue is the public should only want to elect people who aren't addicted to politics. Normal people should want to live in at their Mount Vernon or their Cincinnatus or their Fremont, Nebraska or their whatever neighborhood you're from. That's the center of the world. The center of the world isn't where people go to exercise power. The center of the world is where you break bread around your dinner table and where you raise kids and where you build a small business and where you serve your neighbors and where you worship. That's the center of the world. So healthy people should want to go back home. And right now, most people who want to be in politics, it has always been their greatest aspiration, and they want to stay there, and it's super unhealthy. I don't want to whine about it when you said what's good about it. Intel was where I spent the majority of my time and energy, and when you get to travel clandestinely with the US military or special forces to the edge of a war zone to thank troops and Intel agents who are working on behalf of all of my family and your families to defend our freedom, it's a great honor to be able to say thank you on behalf of you, the voters. The Senate gym is really nice. Other than that, there's nothing really that great about being in the Senate. What's great is being around the dinner table where you live. And we need a lot more people in politics who do it as service and then after 6 or 12 years want to go back home.
Well, in defense of the career that I have, I'm unemployable anywhere else in the world, so I have to stay in DC and do this work. And it's great when we can get out of DC and we can go and meet with folks like you around the country. One of the silver linings of your retirement was that we got to hire Matt Strauss, our Senate Republican lobbyist who's backstage, who worked for you and doing your tax portfolio.
Everything is great about him except his confusion about Buckeye athletics. And you have the same problem, don't you?
Yes.
O-H.
I-O. Well, we were grateful to get Matt, but we were sad to see you leave the Senate. But tell us why did you decide to leave the Senate and go to University of Florida? What were you up to there?
Yeah, I think we're living through a really, really interesting time. We don't have the right institutions for higher ed, but we need a lot of new and more dynamic, more interesting institutions for 15 to 25-year-olds. 100 years from now, when we look back on our moment, I don't think we're going to talk about our politics hardly at all. What we're going to say is we were living through a digital revolution, a technological revolution that disrupted the economy and culture, and therefore had lots and lots of downstream effects, including in our politics. But the much more fundamental thing is, throughout almost all of human history, people worked with atoms. Almost everybody going forward is going to work with bits. I'm a historian by training, as was mentioned in the introduction, and usually historians' job is to be boring at parties, right? People use words like extraordinary, unique, atypical, and usually we're ordinary, typical, normal, not special or unique. We just think our moment is the inflection point of all of human history because we're narcissists and we're here. Therefore, this is the disrupted moment. But what really is happening in our time and place is if you've got four kinds of economies historically: hunter-gatherers, nomadics, agrarianism, industrialism, and whatever's happening now, the knowledge economy, the digital economy, the IT economy. Sociologists just call it the post-industrial economy, which is the after the last thing because we don't know what to call it. All of these people, nomads, agrarians, and industrialists, they worked with physical stuff. We're the first time in history where most people are going to have an intra-generational revolution, mostly work with ephemeral things, bits instead of atoms, and we're already the richest people any time and place in all of human history. Nobody has ever been as rich as the median middle-class American is right now. And we sit on the front end of a hockey stick where it's going to go way higher. We are well within a generation. I don't know if it's 5 years away or 15 years away, but we're well within a generation where we're all going to have robots working for us that build other robots, right? The marginal cost of compute is going to either become free or fall so close to free that we're not going to bother metering it anymore, which means every single thing that you can reduce to a series of steps, which is almost everything in the economy, is going to be automated and become free and become ubiquitous. Economics used to be a discipline of scarcity. We're going to end up with a discipline of abundance. And it's great at one level. It's great at the level of consumption. Being the richest people ever, lots of upside. Here's what's terrible about it. Humans aren't ultimately about more marginal consumption. We're about love of neighbor and service and meaning and community and hunts and production and work. We're meant to do stuff. And right now, we're raising a generation of people. This is my long-winded edge of morphine circuitous path to Shannon's question about why I left the Senate to become a university president again. We are not helping 15 to 25-year-olds figure out what it looks like to be prepared, not just for their next job, but for their third job in an industry that doesn't even exist 10 years from now. And we're heading into a world where everybody's not just going to have a midlife crisis, we're going to have a third life crisis and a quarter life crisis, because you got to figure out how to get trained to do a new kind of thing to serve your neighbor. And no generation's ever had to do that before. And oh, by the way, it's going to happen in the midst of superabundance, which tends to make us really, really stupid. Right? Like if you look at the least happy people on earth statistically, they're lottery winners and people who have massive inherited wealth before they had any work ethic. I'm not making this up. This is like if you look at Arthur Brooks' data about happiness. Like the things that drive happiness are, do you have a theological or philosophical framework to make sense of death and suffering? Do you have theology? Do you have a family? Do you have a few deep friendships? And do you have meaningful work? And not social media friends, not Senate friends, my good friend, the senator from Vermont, whose face I'm about to tear off in a debate. Like real friends, somebody that you love. Like when something good happens in their life, you're happy. You don't choose to, you love them. When something bad happens, like with our kids, mine are 25, 22, and 12. If something hurts one of my kids, I don't choose to hurt. I just hurt because I love them. They're a part of me. That's what Aristotelian friendship is, right? Work, family, friendship, and theology or worldview. Those are the things that drive happiness. If you inherit a whole bunch of money before you have any sense of a work ethic, if your numerator is what did you do to earn your success and your denominator is your presumed needs, the worst thing that can happen to you is all of a sudden be able to consume everything you want and not think you did anything to make a difference in the world. You want to talk pointless? Look at the Saudi royal family's nephews and nieces. None of those people are happy, but they have limitless money and lots of orgies and they're high all the time. No offense to people who might be high a lot of the time, but mine might be stage 4 pancreatic cancer driven, not inherited wealth. But we're producing a generation of 15 to 25-year-olds who don't have any framework for meaning, and so they doom scroll all the time. This is not fundamentally about social media, but social media is the presenting issue of the problem of how do we raise a generation of people in this age of abundance. And it's a really interesting, hard, heaven and hell kind of riddle.
Well, I love that you mentioned Arthur Brooks and have been following him for years, and many of those other scholars. And another one I know that you and I both have talked to is Jonathan Haidt. And this is not a fun conversation to have before lunch, but the impact that social media has on young children, teenagers in particular, and how that's going to impact our entire economy and our civilization. Can you share some of the work you've done there?
So for people who haven't read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, he writes a bestseller like every 2.5 years. It's super embarrassing to those of us who try to write and are a tenth as productive as he is. But The Anxious Generation, amazing book. If you want to put 15 hours in it, great, but put at least 2 hours in it. It's really worth reading. Another colleague, he's at NYU, Gene Twenge, at UCSD, is Twenge, is also really interesting. I'm going to get my XY axis right. If this is time, moving across the x-axis, and y is like problems, if you look at teenage girls from the beginning of data sets, 1930s, 40s, 50s, to the present, teenage girls have attempted suicide much more frequently than teenage boys, but historically don't succeed. Aren't effective at committing suicide. Boys rarely try suicide. When they try, they usually succeed. 2007, 8, 9, there's a hockey stick curve among teenage girls, and you can crosswalk this data in every industrialized nation. And when iPhones and fast download speeds came to their community, all of a sudden teenage girl suicide just goes up like a hockey stick. And this map lays across dozens and dozens and dozens of mental health kinds of problems. It's just indisputable that teenagers who spend a lot of time on social media get their lives really, really messed up. This is way too simple, but one way of thinking about it is if at any given moment we're somewhere between a 1 and 100 on a happiness metric, how do I feel about myself right now? If 50 is the norm, most of us in this room know to bound our ups and downs because we're adults and our frontal lobes are formed. We bound our storytelling at 40 or 60, maybe 30 for a really bad time in your life and 70 for a really good, your kid's wedding toast night, right? Teenagers are far more likely to bounce from 1 to 99 all the time, but if you're not with friends at a given moment, you're less likely to be at 75 or 80 and more likely to be at 25 or 30. And it turns out if your frontal lobe isn't formed and you're alone on your phone doom scrolling as a 14-year-old who's insecure about her body, and you look on your phone and you think everybody else looks like a 97 because you don't have the wisdom to know that this is all groomed and filtered. They're only posting their favorite experiences and they manipulated the images. You think you're actually a 20. And you think everybody else is actually a 97, and that 77 gap makes you think, I'm broken, I'm terrible. We are broken. We're selfish, we're self-absorbed, etc. But you're not broken because you got a body that's going through puberty, right? But historically, people had intergenerational communities to navigate this, and social media on speed will mess you up. And I'm, again, a child of the 70s and 80s, and I remember the famous Joan Collins quote. She's my mom's age, so it's hard for me to imagine Joan Collins as a sex symbol, but whatever, I guess when she said this, she was. No offense to everybody my mom or Joan Collins' age, I'm just saying it feels a little Oedipus weird for me to say, remember when Joan Collins was really hot when I was 9? Sorry, the morphine talking. But Joan Collins had that really smart line. She said, yeah, I may be the most beautiful person in the world. You know how terrible the curse of beauty is? She goes, here's what beauty is. It's like being born rich and then becoming poor your whole life. Think about how weird it is, the things that we put our hope and our identity in. Like, I wasn't good, but I was a good enough high school athlete that I got recruited to wrestle in college. I remember a time when I was 19 or 22, I thought I was really svelte, right? I could bench a hell of a lot for my 5'11" frame. I'm 5'9", by the way. Cancer sucks. I've lost 2 inches in 4 months. 24 pounds I get, 2 inches. I don't understand where it went. But anyway, I remember a time when I thought my muscles mattered. Like, I'm headed for a hospice bed, not that far in the future. What matters is the woman who's my best friend who holds my hand and will be there with me at the end. Joan Collins, that great philosopher, is saying something that's super wise, and humans always needed to hear wisdom as a 15 or a 17-year-old because we were still developing our frontal lobes. Our 15 and 17-year-olds, they don't have many people helping them with this because we put them in hyper-peer communities on speed. These tools are really awesome as production tools. When you add this to your work, more compute power than gymnasium-sized mainframes at MIT in the 1960s, they're really terrible as a substitute source of community, and we're not helping 15 and 20-year-olds figure that out. And I think the Republic succeeds, but I don't think that it survives. I don't think the Republic survives without us figuring out how to do a lot more digital fasting and get a lot more distance from the immediacy of things that say, pull my consciousness away from my time and space, pull it away from where I'm breaking bread with people, pull it away from the wisdom of my grandma. No, you need intergenerational community. You need Sabbaths. You need productive work in your town, and you need a dinner table. And these things are idolatrous liars.
I've been so impressed over the years getting to know your family and especially your 14-year-old son, Breck. My son is also 14. Breck is driving a car at 14. My son won't get the Starbucks coffee without me walking in with him. So how you're doing this and just keeping your kids away from social media, what tips do you have as parents and grandparents and people who just want that next generation to grow up loving liberty and to be good, productive citizens of this country who buy homes? What tips do you have?
Who buy homes? I love
to do that.
Shannon just dropped it in there, right? She's been doing big stuff and she did day job.
Homeownership is the number one part of all of that equation.
Amen. I think we know in our gut that our kids need to develop a time horizon that is more than the immediate. There are 3 kinds of time, right? There's maybe 4 if you distinguish between this second and this day. But let's say there's the present. There's give us this day our daily bread. There's a planning horizon. Am I going to go to college? Should I be hiring another person at the firm for, next year? And then there's eternity and our identity. But there's today, there's a planning horizon, and there's who we are as immortal souls. Kids are inevitably about the insta present, right? It's our job to tell them boredom isn't the worst thing. Boredom is like scar tissue. It's a foundation of future character. We need them to read long-form books. The Republic really won't survive if nobody ever reads books. Less than 12% of Americans will read a book this year. That's never been true before. This is not some old guy, get off my lawn. This is we're all on digital crack, and we don't know how to do long-form attention focus. And so I think one of the things we have to recognize is that as parents and as grandparents, we need to connect our kids to intergenerational communities. We need to give them outlets to do real production and real work. Obviously, sweatshops of 1870 to 1910 were terrible, and yet the idea that kids should never work is insane, right? Like, our kids should be doing lots of work, and we're all so rich, there's almost no work to do around the house. So one of the things we've done is ship our kids off to cattle ranches for cow-calf season or whatever, cancel the lawn mowing service and give your kid the push mower, right? They need lots of work, but we also need to, sorry, just a wave. Pardon me. We need to be able to distinguish between education and character formation and particular tools like school. Way too many parents are acting like you can just hand over the education of your kids to schools. That's crazy. School may or may not be a useful tool for you. A particular school may be more or less useful as a tool, but you're responsible for their character development and their education and their ability to read long-form stuff. If your school doesn't have a phone prohibition, then consider a different school. But fundamentally, school's just a tool that you're hiring. And right now, a lot of people are allowing debates like, is school for training somebody for life or training them for a job? That's a subordinate question to what degree do I use schools versus tutors versus books versus work?
Well, this is going to be one of the very few times that I push someone else's podcast and not the Advocacy Scoop, but would highly recommend listening to Not Dead Yet. And then also you just did a podcast with Uncommon Knowledge. And you
Peter Robinson at Hoover at Stanford, yeah.
Something so profound that this stage in your life is about redeeming the time. And what was it about the basketball shot clock?
Peter Robinson, who was a Reagan speechwriter who runs comms at Hoover at Stanford, has this wonderful podcast called Uncommon Knowledge, and they ended up titling the episode I did with them 2 or 3 weeks ago, Lots of Basketball to be Played in the Last 60 Seconds. As a former strategy consultant, I had a colleague one time who used to talk about, think about how we conceive of Michael Jordan's life and career. I don't know what MJ is, 70 now?
Gosh. Oh, yeah.
65, thank you. 65 times 365 days a year, times 24 hours a day, times 60 minutes, times 60 seconds. Think how much life Michael Jordan has lived. And the most successful guy in the NBA Finals in history, it's only a couple of hours of his whole life that has ever been in NBA Finals, and only a couple of minutes that are peak. You know, Game 6 against Phoenix in the pull-up jumper. Actually, that was Utah. Sorry, my bad. Against the Jazz. The Salt Lake guy. Sorry, you lost. But at the end of the day, like, savoring is pretty important. The whole hike up the mountain, if you go to the Grand Canyon from here and you hike, you do some big climb at Zion, I'm mixing my geographies, you do a big climb, it's an all day long thing. You only get to the top for a few seconds. Make it a few minutes, but more importantly, it wasn't really the destination. It was that you were gonna get to do the destination as a shared thing to reflect on and savor that drove meaning through the whole hike, including all the really hard parts, the blisters and the sweat and the stomach aches, and the getting over the complaining and the teaching your kids to get over the complaining. There's a lot of basketball to be played in the last 60 seconds.
Well, we are all redeeming our time, and we are incredibly honored that you would spend this important time with us. You are in our thoughts, prayers. We have our support. If you want to run for office again, you got that too. Thank you for
I might want to sell some houses.
If you want to sell some houses, I don't know if you want the competition out in Nebraska. Thank you for being here.